Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 262 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, which today is dedicated to the home worker. And for that, I'm really delighted to have with me Chris Coladonato, who I met online through social media first, and we've also met in an open workshop, or more an experiment, which I organized with Next Stage Radicals. And that experiment was on planned spontaneity. And Chris is great because she's really navigated through being a remote worker in a large organization many years ago, over a decade ago, working it out as she went along. You can imagine that 10 years ago, we're now in January 2021, 10 years ago, we didn't have all the resources we have now, and it wasn't as common. So it was, I imagine it was more difficult. And she just worked it out. And in particular, which is why I really wanted her to come on the show, she's developed many deliberate practices to stay connected to others in the organization, to nurture those relationships online that matter to her, and to create opportunities to continue growing her internal network. Now, we all know that in the online space, unless we make space for that, unless we have even a system sometimes for that, it just doesn't happen by chance. We've got to be intentional and deliberate. So I thought she'll be great for those of you, whether you've been working as part of a distributed team for years or whether you had to do it as a result of the pandemic. I think she will provide great inspiration in how to do that, how to make sure that we don't stay isolated and that we continue to nurture those relationships. It's so important. So you have all of that to look forward to. The only thing I'm going to mention before we start is our new Podcasting for Connection service, which is really in line with what I'm talking about I was talking about right now, which is about creating the space in organizations for people to connect with others when people are working away from each other. Away in a physical space, but also away in time. Because if we really embrace remote work, it gives us flexibility, but that also means we might not interact in real time as much with each other. So podcasting is a great asynchronous tool that can help you maintain a sense of belonging in an organization of a certain size, I imagine. It's about the more we are, the more away from each other we might feel. So hopefully podcasting can help with that. But that's all I'm going to say for now. You can always message me if you want to know more. If we haven't met before. If this is your first time on the show, my name is Pilar Orti, and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant. And so you can email me on Pilar, Pilar, at virtualnotdistant.com, or you can use the contact form on that URL. So regular listeners, it's wonderful to have you back to listen to Chris tell her story, because she's also a listener. And talking of listeners, I'd like to say hello to Ami. It might be how you say it in the Netherlands. She messaged me recently through LinkedIn and said she listened to the show. And Yulia, who actually dropped me a tweet on Twitter, where I am at Pilar Orti. And she also said she enjoyed the show. So hello to both of you. Right. I will be back after our conversation to tell you what I'm up to. But for now, let me take you back in time a few months ago in November 2020. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Chris Coladonato because I have met her online a lot asynchronously, and then we've managed to catch some moments online synchronously. We met before this conversation, and I'm really happy to revisit some of what we talked about. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's so great to see you. Well, I saw you now and now I'm hearing you, and listeners, of course, can only hear you, but they can imagine you. And
Exactly.
so I wanted to introduce you to our listeners because you are a great remote work advocate. So you're someone, but it goes beyond that. It's the stuff you share on social media, which is how I've mainly got to know you, is incredibly thoughtful. It's very reflective, and it's also very broad, as in you can come into it from lots of different angles. So I thought it'd be nice for you to share your story of how you've ended up as someone who works and networks in the online space. Let's see what you think of this. I thought we'd go straight back to maybe, I think it was 12 years ago when you first started working away from
Something,
something like
something
that.
like that.
Okay.
That sounds about right.
So we're recording now in November 2020. It's getting to the end of the month. So let's do that. Let's go back 12 years or so when you first started working from home. What were you doing before you started working from home, and what prompted that change?
So I was actually working in an office. It was the first time I had been in an office for a while. And the company that I was working with decided to shift offices and actually close that office. So I didn't really have a choice. I could either go to work from home and keep my job, or I could look for something else if I was interested in exploring working in an office still. And while I have worked in offices and different locations, I had never fully worked from home before. So I thought I would give it a try. And it was a 6-month trial period where I could explore, is this really what's going to work for me? And I'll be honest, I didn't really enjoy it for
Mhm.
the first 6 months. In fact, I didn't enjoy it for like the first year or two. So it was really not a choice that I made. It was, I wanted to keep my job because I really liked what I was doing. So the decision for me to start working remotely was pretty easy. The path and how I came to truly love it was a little bumpy and not quite easy for me.
Mhm. And that's also why I thought it'd be interesting for you to come and speak to listeners at this point in time, because many people will have been forced to work from home,
Hmm.
having little choice. So I think it's really great to also hear from someone who, one, it wasn't their choice, because we always come into the remote work conversation with it's all about choice. So sometimes the working from home is not a choice. And also with the fact that you found it difficult to adjust. So do you remember what were some of the things that you struggled with, Chris?
Yeah, I can vividly remember. So when I was working in the office, I was so used to the hum of other people. And I did like to be around other people. And that's how I started my career. I started in retail, so I was always around other people. So for me to go and work at home where I was by myself and lose that hum, it felt very isolating. So it was both the interaction with other people as well as this hum of activity. Those are the things I think that I missed the most. The other thing that I didn't realize until years later that I truly missed was the structure. So you get up in the morning, you do whatever you need to do, workout, shower, whatever, get in the car, do your commute. Usually you have to be on the road at a certain time in order to get in the office with the least amount of traffic possible. You work your day, you get back in the car, and you go back. And you lose that when you work from home. And I didn't realize how much that structure helped me and helped me be productive in my day. So I'd say the isolation, the hum, it was just me, myself, and I, and the cat in my home office. So I think those were the things that probably for me I struggled with the most.
That's quite important. Also, your context. You said me, myself, my cat. Did you have a separate room or a separate space for your home office?
I did. I was really lucky where My husband and I, the house that we live in, we have spare bedrooms. So one had been my sewing room. So I turned it into a combination sewing room, home office, and really was thoughtful about how I outfitted it so that it worked for me and that it was something that would work for me long term. So that for me was, I was really lucky in that I didn't have to make do on the couch or in a bedroom. So I do count my blessings there.
And when you said that you missed the structure, did that different space not give you enough structure?
I think I was just used to getting up and going somewhere.
Mm.
And yes, I still got up and went somewhere, but it was different. And I think for me, and I know a lot of people I talk to, that commute was the buffer between the start of the workday where I could really think about what is it I'm going to accomplish, and then the end to the workday, so that I actually had a definitive start and end. And I think because that wasn't and it was almost automatic. And I think because it wasn't automatic anymore, those lines for me got really blurred. And I would end up working until late in the evening, not because anybody told me I had to, but really because I just lost track of that transition from work to home. So while, yes, I had somewhere to go, yes, I had meetings, and yes, there was a structure, it wasn't a formal structure until I figured out I needed that
Hmm.
and built that for myself.
Yeah, I've heard the term digital commute come up recently. Uh,
Yes. I do a
and
virtual commute now. Yes.
oh, excellent. What is it that you do?
So in the morning, I make sure that while I work out and I do an early sunrise walk, I also will take a short, maybe 15-minute walk and maybe listen to a podcast, because that's what I used to do when I would commute. I would listen to podcasts. So I listen to some podcasts, I get a cup of coffee, and then I go sit down. And in the evening, I tend to do the same thing. So I will take a walk, I might meditate, or I read a trade article, but a lot of times I go back to my podcast, because that for me is what I was used to. And I try to get outside if I
Mm.
can. And again, just walk. And that for me is the equivalent to driving home. I just take a walk home.
I was thinking also of my husband who works part-time at an institution, and the other days he's got an artist space. And
Mm,
he actually has to get onto the tube and a bus, and he goes to another part of London. It's not very far away. And for me, that wouldn't work for me. I have a local space, but for him, he has to change where he is because the
yeah.
part of the co-working is very different to where we live. So I can, yes, so I can understand that the kind of break you need is different for different people. So what else? What else was it that was that you started to do deliberately? You've said until you deliberately set a structure for yourself, it wasn't working. And what else was it that you started to do? Okay, I need to be changing how I do this.
So the other thing I started doing, I realized there was a point in time, and I can't remember when this was, but nobody told me I had to stay in my house the entire time, but yet I felt like I had to. And I realized there was one day in the winter I had not gone outside for like 3 days.
Wow.
I was like, "Ooh, that's a problem." So I became really mindful that maybe during lunch I would go to the library or go to the local park. And I started going to the library to do some deep thinking work at least once a week. So I would go to the library for a couple of hours and take some things, some research I had to do, or articles I had to read, or some reports that I had to write, and would take them to the library. And what that gave me was that little bit of a hum that I felt I needed. And even though I didn't really talk to many people or interact with many people, people were still around. So it's finding what you need and then just figuring out a way to do that in this environment. So for me, it was the library, cafes. I do that as well. But the library was really the big one for me, and I miss it terribly right now.
Ah, because you can't go because of lockdown stuff.
Exactly. I can go through the drive-through and get books and wave at my librarians, but I cannot go into the library right now because of lockdown.
Yeah, and that's a problem that a lot of people who have been used to working from home have had also, that even those ways that we had of structuring our day, of breaking up our day, or of finding the best place to do the different tasks, that's gone. So we're also
It
having
is.
to work, yeah.
I can't wait until they're back.
Yes. That also, it makes me think. So in the office space, we'd started to see the shift towards more of well, in some places, towards more of an activity-based working where different parts of the building are used for different kind of tasks and activities. And I think to put that mindset also in the home, as in, what do I do best where? Whether
Yes.
it could also be inside the home. Also, they can be different places. I think, like you say, no one tells us we have to be stuck to the same chair all the time.
But we almost we feel I don't know what it is, but that's where our wherever we set up, we just gravitate towards there. And like you said, no one told us that. You bring up a really good point. It can be inside the home too. So I know if I have to do deep thinking now and I don't have the opportunity to go to the library, I go to a different part of my house. Even making that switch and going to a different place can really help creativity. It can also help you to be a little bit re-energized, because if you are sitting in the same chair all day long looking at the same screen on the same computer, you're going to be extremely tired, both physically and mentally, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So this is mainly about creating your physical space to help you work and be comfortable and
Mhm.
enjoy it. And again, not missing that you don't have a different setup. So how about the other side of working from home and working away from colleagues? How did you manage that? What do you remember what you used to do before and how it's changed? And also, I have to say to listeners that you've almost never worked in the same location as your boss. I think it's a great tagline. This is Chris. So, yes, how have you changed how you relate to others?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. And as you brought up, it is, I think I've spent maybe 2 years working in the same location as my official manager over the span of my career. So years ago, back in the day, it was teleconferences. And in fact, when I first started working from home, that was back in 2008 or so, and technology wasn't where it is today. So we didn't have a lot of things like Zoom, Skype, WebEx. We had some very basic tools. So I had to make a just a very conscious and intentional effort to either email or use instant message, because we didn't have regular video conferences. We just didn't have that technology and didn't even have webcams to start. So for me, what I found that I had to start doing was actually schedule in my calendar time to connect with people. So I used to have a reminder on my calendar every morning, and the reminder said, say hi. And that's all it said. And it was my reminder to reach out to somebody else on my team, regardless of where they were located, and even outside my team, to just reach out to somebody, say, hey, how you doing? Almost like a wave hello in the hallway. And I found that helped me to keep connected. And then as our technology grew and our options grew, we eventually had and got internal social networks. So now, and it's a habit, I've been doing this for 12, 13 years. I no longer need those reminders, but I reach out every day or every other day to say good morning, hello to somebody. And now I make sure that I participate and engage in the conversations that are happening on our enterprise social networks, because that for me is my workplace. My going into the office is now me logging into my enterprise social network and saying hello and catching up on discussions and seeing what other people said. And I'm really mindful about engaging in a conversation and not just liking something. There's nothing wrong with liking something, but stopping for a moment and really reflecting on what somebody shared and having a contribution, because that's what you would do face to face. And you may wave at somebody, but you don't just wave at everybody and never say anything.
Mhm.
So I took that. And as our technology grew, that's how I started to change how I engage. So I do that in the mornings, that's also part of my startup routine and how I get myself set for the day. I do a little bit of that externally, and then when I start my workday, I shift and I do that internally using the tools.
Great. Sorry, I'm taking notes because you're saying so much stuff that I need to come back to. So the first one I want to come back to is it's very interesting because I think it's quite a revelation for people who haven't worked in this way. I mean, I especially usually work with managers, and it's always this thing of you've got to write down any information that you're gathering about people during the day, because if not, you will forget it. And this is important information you might need to relate back to the team. But also that idea of, and you have to put in your calendar to either wave or call or whatever you need to be doing until, like you say, until it becomes a habit. I think also with other more task-related communication also, you also need to be doing that, because if not, you're going to forget to have a look through a project management board or through a conversations application or something. And until it becomes a habit, you and especially now, I mean, you were doing it then, but now use technology to help you not have to think too much.
Exactly. I would never remember if I didn't use and for me, I live and breathe with my calendar, and I let it do the thinking for me. And to your point, it's for a lot of different things. So especially with all the different tools and technology that are available in workplaces now, I find that I also had to schedule time to check the enterprise social networks. So until that became a habit. So it's a great point that you bring up to use the technology and let it help you.
Mm-hmm. And then I want to come into this, the idea of the internal social network, and also we'll touch on the external later, because you said you do both. You engage with people inside your organization. Just for listeners to get a sense, how large is your organization? Just so we get a sense what ecosystem you're operating in.
We are more than 15,000 strong. So we're about between 15 and 20,000.
Okay. So that's a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Also, just for some listeners, they might not know about the social enterprise networks, they're actually like social media in-house. They are online, a place where you go. I think it's the modern version of a forum where you have different groups talking about different things and different things happening, but anyone can log on at any time and be part of that conversation. So starting initially with your internal, when you go in, what is it that you look for, and what kind of conversations do you look to engage with?
It's really interesting because I treat what I do internally and externally very similarly.
Mm-hmm.
So when I log on internal, I always check whatever news feed that I have. So I always just scan to see what's coming up. So just like you would do on LinkedIn or Twitter, I just do a quick scan. And then I am always really mindful of what groups I participate in. So while I do a quick scan to see, is there anything out there that maybe hasn't been posted to a group I belong to that I just want to take a peek at, or I want to know more, or maybe there's somebody I haven't met before that is sharing some really interesting things. And then I go to the groups that I belong to and I look to see if there's any new messages. And then I also think about, because what I'll do as part of also my morning routine is I read a lot. So I use Feedly. I read through articles, and there may be something that relates to my groups that I belong to, either internally or externally, that I want to share. So it's a little bit of quick scan, and then I take a look and see what's been posted in the groups. And then I also have a couple of opportunities, or I take some time to share any relevant information to those groups. And I'm really mindful about making sure I belong to a variety of groups, because that for me gives me great perspective. And I try different groups that maybe I wouldn't think about, maybe some different interests or different conversations that are not normally things that I would engage in, just to check things out and to broaden my perspectives.
So I think it's worth for listeners to know that you're in learning and development.
Yeah.
Just so that to understand also that the breadth of your network is also very important, I imagine, for your job. Because I'm thinking, So when does she do any work? But this is a core. But this is a core part of. Well, this should be a core part of any professional, regardless
Yeah.
of what their work is. But I suppose in your case, it's even more important. I would say, but or not.
No, I think it is, but I think going back to your point, it's important for anybody.
Mm.
So, one of the things that I do is I make sure I belong to groups that represent different areas of the business, because I think it's really important to understand what's happening outside of our own line of business, outside of what we do as a department. So, while yes, it's important for me because I support the business, employees are my customers. I want to make sure I understand what they're going through and what they're doing. It's also really relevant for me and for anybody else. I always recommend, pick and choose different groups because that helps you to expand not just your network, but your perspective on what's happening in the business. And I recommend the same thing for externally as well. We can get so focused on our area of interest. So I could just focus on talent development or learning and development or training, and it's having a wide range of conversations and voices that really allows you to get some different perspectives that you might not have gotten before.
And on top of that, you were saying that sometimes when you're looking through that news feed, which is basically like a summary of what's happened in the whole social network, that you will pick something to interact with by someone you haven't met before. So is this also what do you do with those moments when you respond to someone, yeah, that you haven't connected with before?
Yeah, it's an opportunity for me to, and it's interesting because I find it easier to do that online than I do in person.
Yeah, me too.
Full disclosure. So I have no problem walking up to somebody in the virtual hallway and saying hello. So I'm usually trying to not just say hi, but thank them for posting, depending on what it is that they posted, and usually ask a question to dive a little bit deeper because I find that questions allow us to get to know people in a different way. So I try to um, usually post something that is relevant to what, so maybe it'll be my thoughts on what they posted. And then I tend to ask a follow up question because I'd like to get to know that person a little bit better. And sometimes these conversations, they may last for a little bit and then we don't have as much in common or it's not a conversation that we feel that we need to continue with, and so that's maybe what they call weak ties at work. I know they talk about strong ties and weak ties and they're both important in your network. But sometimes it leads to something completely different. And sometimes I will actually be working on a project maybe a year or so later where that person is a part of the project as well. So we can almost pick up where we're like, hey, I remember you were posting. Yeah, that's right. And it gives us the ability to almost ramp up our professional work together because we've had a conversation maybe 6 months ago, maybe a year ago, but we already got to know each other. So that's kind of how I approach it. And it's not a hard and fast rule.
Yes.
Sometimes it's just a question. Sometimes it's a, hey, thanks for posting it. I think that's a really interesting. And sometimes I'll cross post that to another group too.
And how do you stay in touch and build the relationships with the people that you work with? So that this is for me looking at staying within the business and understanding what's going on and feeling, to be honest, going back to your very very early point, this to me is starting to feel quite like a hum or a buzz around you, even if it's text based. The hum you were saying you were missing at the beginning when you started working from home. How do you continue building those relationships with those you work with more regularly?
Yeah, and I really like that you brought up the hum because that's what it is. It is a hum of activity. So, in addition to our regular team meetings that we have, and we often have just team gatherings as well, because most of our team doesn't work in the same location. So we're spread out across the United States. And for us, this was regular, where it wasn't new because of what happened with the pandemic. We had always had to connect virtually. So while we do our regular meetings, I also make a point to connect with somebody on a regular basis in a different way, whether that's let's have a lunch together, Or I might reach out to them just to say hello, and invite them for coffee. Sometimes I even just have a invite, and or our team does a coffee chat where it's not anything work related, but we just connect over coffee, tea, whatever time it is in your time zone, and just connect as humans. So I try to do a little bit of that one on one, but then I also try to do that a little bit, as smaller groups too. And it looks different every week, but I will write those little reminders on my calendar if I feel I can't remember it, just to make sure I'm reaching out to people on a consistent basis. And sometimes I just have a rotating list, and I use the technology and set a reminder for myself and say, "Hey, you need to reach out to, Joni or Tracy this week." And it's just a quick little reminder for me because I know I won't remember.
Mhm. And you said when I was talking to you the last time we spoke that you looked for those little moments that matter, because quite often we think that we need big gestures to really show we care and evolve our relationships, but actually it's these little things that we might be able to do.
I agree. They add up. And I find that for me and for the relationships that I build, the ones that have spanned the longest length of time and the ones that are the most rich are the ones where I'm regularly connecting and finding those small opportunities, whether I send them an e-card, whether it is a quick Teams chat just to say hi. Maybe we send some gifts back and forth. Maybe we talk about what we did over the weekend, or maybe it's a coffee chat or a quick lunch. Oftentimes, I think we default to the big things. What's the large celebration we need to do, or what's the large party we need to make? And there is nothing wrong with those things. However, what's happening in between? In all of those other moments, each moment of every day is an opportunity to engage and connect with somebody. So, what is it that you can do on a daily basis? Just a small thing, a small moment. What's one thing that you can do to take a moment out of your day to connect with somebody else? And that's how I think about those moments that matter. It's what is it that I can do, no matter how small it is, just to connect with somebody. And if you do that regularly, then those add up and it allows you to have a stronger relationship in the long run.
Yeah, I was talking to a team that again have been caught in the pandemic, but they were quite used to working online with Google Workplace. But I realized that not all of them had their profile pictures in within their
Mm,
account. And I was talking, I used it as an example because it can be very personal whether you decide to stick your picture in your Google
mhm.
account. But I used it as an example of small stuff we can do to increase the
Exactly.
sense of connection. It's not huge things. And also just reflecting back, because of course, how do you, when you, it's fine when you're talking to people who are already in the space, but when you're not, I think we need to develop a radar which says, oh, is this an opportunity? Oh, if I tweak
Mhm,
this here, oh, if I tweak that
mhm.
there. So it sounds also from what you're saying that it's so difficult to find those moments of connection that we every time we can connect with someone, we have to make the most out of it in some way.
Exactly, and I really like that radar analogy. It's something just to always be mindful of, and I always tell people, and I know you speak to this as well, you have to really be intentional because we've lost these social and visual cues. We don't see people passing in the hallway. We don't walk into an office together with somebody. So, what are those things that you need to do for yourself to help you remember? What are those cues you need to set up so that you can have some of those moments? And the moment may be when you join a meeting, maybe you don't get right down to business in the first 5 minutes. Maybe you have a opening question that people can connect and learn more about each other. So there's lots of these little moments and opportunities throughout the day that we can take more advantage of. We just have to your point, we have to be aware of them. And it may pass you by, but you could scribble a note down and say, ooh, this is something I want to do maybe tomorrow or the next day. And you can have a collection of these potential moments. And what I like about them is, again, they're cumulative. So you don't have to wait for the big celebration or the big event. Just think about what is it throughout your day, even if you're looking at your calendar, and pick out one or two moments that you can connect with somebody throughout the day.
That is so in line with the concept for me of planned spontaneity also,
Yes,
because the spontaneity is in that idea that you have, oh, I could do this, but instead of actioning it there and then, you capture it and you leave it for later. And then I like that. It's the spontaneity is in the idea generation, and then you can plan it and stick it in deliberately into something, because online, that's what we need to do.
exactly.
So going then to the external, so you were saying you use your internal social network very deliberately. And how do you use external social media?
Very similar. I try to make sure that I make the time for it. So, and it goes back to your comment, when does she get work done? So I set times. There are certain times in the day where I dip in and out, both internally and externally. And I'm really mindful of making sure that I set aside time for that. It's not as if I am in either external or internal social media all day long. I have that time blocked, and that's what I do. Now, for external, I make sure that I spend probably 15 minutes at the start of the day and 15 minutes at the end of the day. Sometimes it's longer. I might jump in on lunch. And on the weekends, I spend a little bit more time on it. But I'm very intentional where I'll scan my news feed, and then I go in and dive into if I belong to groups or if there's particular people I want to follow up on. And externally, I do a lot of saving. So I'll save things to dig into them later, because I'm usually, when I'm jumping in and out, I don't have a ton of time. So I'll do a quick scan. And if something catches my eye that I want to read deeper, I'll save it so that when I have more time in the evening or on the weekend, I can really reflect on what somebody has said or something they've shared. And again, I don't always just like things. And I think that's really important, because a lot of times on social media, it's really easy to get caught up in the quick scan and the like, but that's not how you build relationships and build connections. And I know that was true for when you and I first met on LinkedIn, as well as a lot of my other connections. While I might have followed somebody, and I followed you for a while and I like things here or there, it was when I had an opportunity to really dive deeper into what you were sharing, where I could meaningfully share back, here are my thoughts on what you shared. And that's when the conversation starts. So I'm really conscious of doing that and making sure that, again, I'm not just focused on talent development or working remotely, although it seems that that's really what I've been focused on the past few months. I try to scan other voices and other insights, because you never know what you might hear about in a different industry that could relate or spark an idea for you and your industry. So that's why I think it's really important not to just hear from the same people all the time, but to be expanding your network and listening to people of all different locations and industries and roles and time in their career. I mean, it's just we have the entire world that we can connect with. So why limit yourself to just a small space?
Yeah. Yes, I agree. So I want to finish with an anecdote. I hope you don't mind. We can always cut it, but a personal anecdote. And you met your husband online,
I did.
which just
Uh,
makes so much sense.
it wasn't planned. This whole thing wasn't planned, and I never thought I would. I was just really busy at the time in my life, and I was traveling a lot. And I thought, well, let me try this thing called online dating. And this was back in the day. This was like 1999, 2000. So this was when online dating was not the apps and you swipe. You really had to work for it.
Yes.
So I had to take a picture. I had to take an actual photo and take it. I think I took it to Kinko's and had it scanned in so I
Wow.
could then go back to my computer, use dial up and actually, wait for the whole thing to go through. And then I had to scan it and I had to post it on the profile. So you really had to work for things back in the day.
Wow.
But we met and it was successful, obviously, because we are now married and have been married for 16 years. But yeah, it seems to be a repetitive theme in my life that I didn't realize until recently.
Yes. Well, the online space is wonderful if you embrace it, and you referred at one
Yes.
point about how much easier it is for you to tap someone on the shoulder and wave
Mhm.
someone you haven't met online. It's the same for me. If it's the online space has allowed me to do so much stuff, including staying in touch with my husband while we were in different countries, and my parents, and I've met so many people that actually, if I was limited to London, I wouldn't have met. So it's if you are lucky that your personality allows you to embrace it, it's really fantastic. So, listeners, I don't know if you remember Justin Morris, who was on the show in 2019. He met his wife on Twitter. So, we want more stories like these, please. Great.
Yeah, it
Well,
just opens
yeah.
up so many doors. So why not try it out and take it for a spin?
Yes, yes. Wow. Well, Chris, we're gonna wrap this one up. I think we could carry on talking for forever. I don't know if there anything that we should have covered that we haven't covered, or any parting words to listeners that you'd like to leave us with.
Yeah, I think for me, we've covered a lot of different things, but I keep going back to being intentional. This doesn't just happen. Again, we've lost those visual and social cues. So whether it is forced remote or it's your choice, you still need to be intentional about continuing to build relationships, whether they're within your workplace or externally. So figure out what works for you, schedule it if you need to, and until it becomes a habit. But just be really intentional and think about who and when and what and how can you connect with somebody, and just choose somebody each day and try a different method and see what works for you.
Listeners, I hope you understand my love for podcasting, because this is a conversation that I would have probably had in private. And indeed, I did have some of it in private before the recording, a week before or so, with Chris. But through podcasting, I've been able to share not just what Chris says, but also the joy of conversing with her, the joy of talking to someone across the globe who I met online and who I've never met in person, but who I've learned and I'm learning so much from. So I hope that you enjoyed our time with us. Do connect with Chris. You can find her on both LinkedIn and Twitter. Her name is Chris, Chris, and then Coladonato, Coladonato. And do check out her blog too. We'll put all the links in the show notes. Maya, we'll put the link in the show notes, because remember that you can always share what happens in the podcast with people who don't listen to podcasts, because we have quite decent show notes. They're not transcripts, they're show notes, they're a summary, and they're written to be read. So thanks, Maya, for that. Now, listeners, if you are on LinkedIn, we do have a page, and the page is quite active. So do check out a recent post from our company account, Virtual Not Distant. This is a new initiative by Becky, and it's a monthly question that she wants to post anyone who's reading the page or who's following the page. And I love this question, and there were quite a few replies on my own personal feed about this. The question was, if you had a friend who was going to move their business remote and they're going to open their laptop at 9 a.m. on Monday, what is the one piece of advice that you would give them? And we had a handful of replies, and they all really went to the core of it's not about the tech. And this is an opportunity to reinvent yourself, or to be intentional again about what's important to you and designing for that. So check that out. We'll put the link in the show notes, and do follow the page if you want to stay in touch. And if you're still listening, listeners, you're here still with us, you might as well want to say hello. So I've got a question for you. Sometimes I know I listen to podcasts and I'd like to say hello, but I don't know what to say. What do you think of this idea? I've been thinking that I'm realizing with many clients that And it's always been like this. It's not about the tech and knowing how to use the tech, because we need to understand what kind of interactions we want to have with our colleagues. If we're managing a team, it's really about the core of leadership practice and seeing how we need to adapt that to the online space. But having said that, especially in the last year, there hasn't been any time for people to really learn how to use the tools that are being provided by organizations, or even the ones that they've been using for a while, which they know they can exploit them more. And I'm not necessarily talking about productivity, because I think that most people have worked out different ways of using the tech to be productive, but it's about designing spaces for connection and really understanding how the tool can work better for us as a team. So what I end up doing sometimes, especially mainly in in-house trainings, is I do have sometimes some follow-up materials, which sometimes are about the tech, because it's not something we cover, of course, during the session. And I'm just thinking, maybe a surgery, maybe saying to people, okay, here's a 90-minute slot with me. If you use Microsoft 365, well, mainly MS Teams, Planner, and OneNote, because I can't go beyond that. So if you use that and are wondering how to use it better, spend 90 minutes with me. We'll have a look. Or if you use Basecamp, I also know how to use that tool now. Or if you have a tool stack which includes Trello, Slack, and Google Workplace, I think 90 minutes I might help you a bit. We're not going to teach you how to use the tool, but we might look at what communication can work best there and what agreements need to be around. And maybe one or two technical things that we need to know to make best use of it. So I'm not a tech expert, and I used to really shy away, because once someone who I was working with introduced me during an off-site day to her husband, like the tech lady. I'm really not. But I love the fact that this technology is out there and is enabling us to be more human, actually, and to connect in ways that we wouldn't otherwise if we were just using the phone, for example, or only email and phone, or only email, phone, and online meetings. So I would love to know, listeners, what you think of this idea. You're not committing to anything, but I'm just thinking, is that something that people might want? So Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com, it will just show us that you're listening. I know that I listen to a lot of podcasts and never get in touch. Now, I now have a checklist on Trello with calls to action. So if you're done, thank you for listening. Otherwise, remember, you can subscribe to the show, 21st Century Work Life, on whatever podcast app you use. If you do find an app and you can't find us because you use a certain platform, whatever, let me know. You can sign up to our monthly newsletter over at virtualnotdistant.com, and that comes out once a month, because I can't cope. And it's got reading and listening recommendations and a digest of our own content. You can follow our page on LinkedIn. On Twitter, we are at Virtual Teamwork with a 0 instead of an O in work. You can follow me at Pilar Orti. And if you are interested in podcasting as an individual, I am starting a new thing. Aside from Virtual Not Distant, you can follow me on Twitter at InPodcasting. That is it. If you have listened to this episode, which as always, they are quite long, then thank you very much. We will be back in 2 weeks. And I'm really grateful that you're listening, because there are a lot of podcasts now which cover very similar subjects to what we look at here, and topics, and even similar points of view. So I'm delighted that you're here with me. Thank you for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work Life podcast, produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.